Hi everybody, tonight we're going to talk about the financial sector. We're going to talk about the components of the economy that keep money flowing. Remember that circular flow diagram we showed a while ago. It's those portions of the economy, banks, the Federal Reserve, different trading intermediaries that keep industry producing, keep savers able to, or make savers able to spend, and long-term instruments and mortgages keep those things in the mix. We're going to talk about the financial sector in the course of 8 school nights. So we'll do this the following way. First, we're going to talk about savings and investment. Then we'll talk about money, what it is and how it's measured. We'll talk about the time value of money, why I'd rather have money today than tomorrow. We're going to talk about the role of banks and how they create money. We'll talk about the Federal Reserve, what it does, how it uses monetary policy to influence the economy. We'll talk about the money market. And we'll talk about the market for loanable funds. Again, we'll do that over the next 8 class periods and school nights. Okay, let's start off by talking about saving investment in the financial system. This is Krugman Module 22. We're going to talk about the savings, investment, spending identity, why that's important. And then we'll talk about the financial system. We'll talk about what a financial system does, why it exists. We'll talk about the types of financial assets that system uses. Then we'll talk about financial intermediaries, or the people who are trading these financial instruments in order to accomplish the tasks in the financial system. Let's start with the savings investment identity, or S equals I. This is important because in order to understand how investment is financed, let's first understand how savings and investment are related in the economy as a whole, because in order to invest, corporations need to get that money from somewhere. And we're going to talk about how that comes from savings. Now, this does work in the simplest of economies that we're going to use here for an example, but it also holds when we bring the public and foreign sectors in, and those will be in the next 2 slides. So in a simple economy, there's no government and no trade. So 0 imports and exports and no government spending. Now, remember the really simple circular flow diagram. Part of what that diagram showed is that all money spent by consumers and firms ends up in another person's pocket as income, including the profit that somebody makes. So another way to say that is that total income in an economy equals the total spending in an economy. When there's no trade and no government, total income is going to equal total spending. Well, what do people do with the income they earn? Remember the circular flow model? Well, they spend it on consumption, C, or they save it. So if total income equals total spending, let's break each of these 2 down. Total income equals consumption, or rather consumer spending, plus savings, consumption and consumer spending here being the synonymous, and then total spending is consumer spending plus investment spending. So if I have here C plus S equals C plus I, well, the C's cancel each other out, or I get savings equals investment. Well, let's add the government, or the public sector, to the private sector and see what happens. Well, government, you'll recall, spends on goods and services, or G, remember that component of GDP, and pays transfers to some people. Think of government assistance, Social Security, Medicaid, other transfer payments. Government collects tax revenue to pay for these things, of course, or they borrow. If the government budget is balanced, well, that means that the tax revenue that they take in equals government spending plus transfer payments. That's these 2. Now, if we rearrange this equation and call the budget balance, what do we get? We get budget balance equals tax revenue minus government spending on goods and services minus transfers. So what does this mean? Well, if the budget balance is greater than 0, this amount, then the government has a budget surplus and is saving money. And that's important when we think about the savings component of savings equals investment. Now, if the budget balance is less than 0, the government has a budget deficit and is borrowing money, or dissaving, and it will take away from this side of the equation. Well, now we can include public sector savings in this identity, and we call it national savings. So national savings is public sector plus private sector, private sector plus public sector. And again, here you can have a surplus or a deficit. And here, then we have S plus BB equals I. So now we're including government in the equation. Now let's add the foreign sector. So remember, in this example, American saver money can save her money in the U.S. or in another nation. right? So a foreign citizen can also save money in his home country or in the US. So the US receives inflows of funds if that foreign investor puts money in the US economy, and we experience outflows of funds. That's just domestic savings that go toward investment in another country. So let's take those inflows and outflows and create a term called capital inflow. Capital inflow equals total inflow into the US economy minus outflow. Now, it can be negative or positive, so it can increase or decrease the total funds available for investment because they're either here in the US or they're in other countries. So now we have private savings plus budget balance of the government plus capital inflow all equaling investment. So what happens here? If the capital investment is greater than zero, that means there are more foreign funds coming into the US than US funds going out. So some portion of investment spending must be funded by the savings of foreigners in order to keep this identity equal. Now, if the capital inflow is less than zero, what does that mean? It means fewer foreign bonds are coming into the US than US funds going out. Well, then some portion of national savings is funding investment spending in other countries and not ours. So take a minute to get through these two slides again. You can always just play it back, these three slides rather, play it back and take a look. We'll also go over them again tomorrow to make sure you understand that basic identity. Let's talk now about the financial system itself. Well, financial markets are where households invest their current savings and their accumulated savings or wealth, and they do that by purchasing financial assets. What is a financial asset? It's nothing more than a paper claim that entitles the buyer to future income from the seller. So what are the tasks of a financial system? Why does it exist? First, it reduces transaction costs, or the actual cost of executing a deal. Second, it reduces risk, the risk associated with gains or losses through diversification or selling shares of stock. The third thing it does is provides liquidity. And what liquidity does is turns non-cash assets into cash quickly so that a company can satisfy cash obligations. Now, how does it accomplish these tasks? Well, it does it with financial assets. Financial asset is nothing more than a paper claim that entitles the buyer to future income from the seller. Let's talk about kinds of financial assets. First, we have loans, like a car loan or a home loan. All it is a financial agreement between a borrower and a lender. Bonds, this is a more complicated financial instrument, but what it basically does is promises if you give an entity, either a government or a company, a fixed amount of money, they will pay you interest on that money for a certain amount of years and then pay you back the full amount that you lent them on a particular date. Loan-backed securities are nothing more than taking individual loans from up here and putting them into a pool and then creating securities out of that. It's a process called securitization. Stocks share in the ownership interest of a company. I'm not going to jump too deep into some of the intricacies of these simply because then we'd be getting into a finance class versus an economics class, but these are the important ones for you to understand. Now, how do these instruments get traded? Well, through intermediaries. All those are as institutions that, as it says here, transform funds gathered from many individuals into financial assets that can then be traded. Four types: mutual funds, pension funds, and banks. What I'm going to do, rather than reading this all through here, I'm going to let you pause the video right now, and when you're done, you can come back. All right, so what were the key economic concepts for this module? First of all, the savings investment identity. Keep in mind that savings equals investment, and that's very important. Second, when the government is included, we discovered that the government can also contribute to national savings in the form of a budget surplus, and it can detract if there's a deficit. We also talked about how money flows into and out of the U.S. economy and how that plays into that identity. The last thing here, the financial system, it facilitates transactions. So again, the financial system is put together to make these transactions happen so that we can reduce costs, we can reduce risk, and we can increase liquidity in the market to help make the economy function. That's it. Have a great night, and I will see you tomorrow.